In the spring of 1865, when the last reports of the American Civil War were still traveling west by telegraph, the ranching settlements along the Cache la Poudre River in the Colorado Territory were concerned with more immediate matters: cattle prices, late frosts, and the steady arithmetic of meat against heat. It was in that season that a Scottish widow, newly arrived and conspicuously out of place, announced that she intended to store winter ice through the coming summer. Her name was Elspeth MacLeod, born near Inverness, trained in no formal institution, widowed at 39, and by profession, if one required a respectable word for it, a stonemason. She had worked beside her husband in Scotland, setting fieldstone walls and repairing crofts. In Colorado, she owned a modest ranch on 20 acres outside the settlement that would later become Fort Collins. When she told her neighbors that she would cut blocks of river ice in January and preserve them until August, the response was not hostile. It was clinical. Dr. Edwin Farnsworth of Denver, who had studied medicine at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London, explained the matter carefully over supper one evening. "Madam," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "the mean July temperature here exceeds 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Direct solar exposure, even moderated by timber, will melt any stored ice within weeks. The latent heat of fusion is not a matter of sentiment." Herr Otto Weiss, a German-trained mechanical engineer recently arrived from Bremen and employed by a local milling concern, added that insulation of sufficient quality required either thick masonry vaults or sawdust packing in large commercial quantities, an approach used in Boston ice warehouses, where blocks were shipped south by rail and sea. "Peat and straw," he noted, "are agricultural materials. They absorb moisture and rot. Moisture conducts heat. It is unsuitable." Even Reverend Thomas Lyle, formerly of Aberdeen, suggested that the widow's efforts might be better directed toward preserving meat by salting or smoking, practices long tested and understood. Their objections were reasonable. Icehouses did exist, of course. In England and Germany, estates maintained brick or stone ice wells sunk below ground level. In Boston, Frederick Tudor's trade had demonstrated that ice could be transported to the Caribbean when packed in sawdust and loaded by the thousands of tons. But those operations relied on scale, deep excavation, tight masonry, and commercial infrastructure. Elspeth MacLeod proposed something smaller and distinctly rural. She would build it herself. Failure would not be an embarrassment alone. It would be financial. In 1865, beef in the Colorado Territory sold at between 8 and 12 cents per pound. Spoilage during summer months, particularly in July and August, could consume a third of a rancher's slaughtered stock, if not sold immediately. Without reliable cooling, meat had to be salted heavily or dried. Both processes reduced weight and market price. Elspeth's ranch ran 27 head of cattle. Losing even 5 to heat-related spoilage represented a significant share of her annual income. If her experiment failed, she would have wasted winter labor, precious hay, and the time required to cut and store ice. Worse, she would have validated the collective judgment of men who already regarded her as ambitious beyond her station. She did not argue. In December 1865, she began digging. The site she selected was a north-facing slope 40 yards from her barn, shaded by a stand of cottonwoods. She marked a circle 14 feet in diameter with stakes and twine, then excavated to a depth of 10 feet. The soil, a mixture of loam and clay, was set aside for later use. The foundation was dry-laid stone, sourced from her own property. She built a circular retaining wall 18 inches thick, carefully interlocking each stone without mortar, allowing minute air gaps between irregular surfaces. Above the subterranean chamber, she constructed a timber frame roof, pitched at 45 degrees to shed snow and rain. The roof cavity was packed not with sawdust, as in Boston practice, but with layered peat and straw. The peat she cut from a marshy tract along the river, slicing it into blocks roughly 12 inches by 8 inches by 4 inches. Once dried, peat forms a fibrous, carbon-rich mass with low thermal conductivity, approximately 0.04 to 0.06 watts per meter Kelvin, comparable to softwood and not dissimilar to modern insulating materials. The straw was laid in alternating layers, compressed to roughly 8 inches thick between wooden slats. Inside the chamber, she lined the stone wall with a 6-inch layer of packed straw, then a 4-inch layer of peat, creating a composite insulation nearly 10 inches thick. The floor was sloped gently, 1 inch per 4 feet, toward a central drain, allowing meltwater to escape through a stone-lined channel leading downhill. In January 1866, when nighttime temperatures fell to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. She and 2 hired hands cut ice blocks from the Cache La Poudre River. Each block measured approximately 24 inches by 18 inches by 12 inches and weighed near 200 pounds. They harvested 110 blocks over 6 days, stacking them within the chamber with straw packed between layers. Total stored mass approached 11 tons. Herr Weiss observed the stacking with detached curiosity. "It will delay melting," he conceded. "Perhaps into April." Dr. Farnsworth calculated informally that, assuming a daily heat influx of even modest magnitude, complete melting would occur before midsummer. Elspeth sealed the chamber in late January and said nothing further. By May, when daytime temperatures exceeded 70 degrees Fahrenheit, speculation resumed. Ranchers predicted seepage and collapse. Some advised her privately to open the chamber early and salvage what remained. She declined. By June 15, 1866, the region experienced an early heat wave. Denver recorded temperatures of 92 degrees Fahrenheit on consecutive days. Reports in the Rocky Mountain News described carcasses spoiling within 36 hours of slaughter. If you find value in careful reconstructions of overlooked histories such as this, consider subscribing or recording your thoughts below. It allows these measured accounts to continue, much as Elspeth's quiet persistence allowed her work to unfold. By July 1st, the mean temperature in Fort Collins hovered near 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Conventional root cellars, dug shallow and uninsulated, registered internal temperatures of 60 to 65 degrees by mid-afternoon. Elspeth opened her icehouse on July 4th. The principle she relied upon was neither mystical nor experimental. Peat, when dried thoroughly, contains entrapped air within its fibrous matrix. Air, when still, is a poor conductor of heat, approximately 0.024 watts per meter Kelvin. Straw behaves similarly, its hollow stems trapping air pockets that slow conductive heat transfer. But Margaret's critical insight was geometric rather than material. She had constructed a composite barrier nearly 10 inches thick, combining peat and straw in alternating layers. Thermal resistance increases proportionally with thickness. In effect, she had created a high R-value wall, though that terminology would not emerge for decades. More significantly, she built below-grade. Soil temperatures at a depth of 8 to 10 feet in Colorado remain comparatively stable, averaging near 50 degrees Fahrenheit annually. By embedding most of the chamber underground, she reduced exposure to daily thermal fluctuations. Finally, she allowed meltwater to drain. Standing water accelerates melting by increasing convective heat transfer. By maintaining dryness within the chamber, she preserved the insulating air layers. Similar principles had been used for centuries in Scandinavian ice pits and Persian yakhchals, ancient domed structures designed to store ice in desert climates. In parts of Bavaria, peat-lined ice cellars were documented in estate records as early as the 18th century. Elspeth did not invent insulation. She applied it precisely. The true test arrived in August 1866. A drought gripped the region. For 28 consecutive days, temperatures exceeded 85 degrees Fahrenheit. On August 12th, Fort Collins recorded 96 degrees. Local ranchers slaughtered cattle early to prevent heat exhaustion. Without cooling, meat spoiled within 24 hours. Salt supplies dwindled. Prices fell as sellers rushed product to market simultaneously. Elspeth slaughtered 2 steers on August 14th. She carried quartered sections into the icehouse and hung them above the remaining ice mass. Internal temperature of the chamber, measured by a mercury thermometer provided by Dr. Farnsworth, who now watched with interest, registered 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Conventional root cellars measured 62 degrees that afternoon. Over 5 days, Margaret sold fresh beef at a premium of 2 cents per pound above salted meat. No spoilage was recorded. Her ledger for August showed a 28% higher return per animal compared to neighboring ranches. When she reopened the chamber on September 1st, approximately 40% of the original ice mass remained, roughly 4 to 5 tons by estimation. The calculation was straightforward. Heat transfer through 10 inches of low-conductivity material, combined with subterranean placement, had slowed melting sufficiently to preserve over half the mass through peak summer. Dr. Farnsworth recorded recorded observations in his journal. August 16, 1866. Temperature external 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Interior of McLeod structure 39 degrees Fahrenheit at 2 p.m. Meat firm to the touch. No odor of putrefaction. Ice mass substantial. Herr Weiss returned with a measuring rod and inspected wall thickness himself. He estimated total insulation thickness at 9.5 inches and noted the dryness of interior straw. In September, he wrote to a colleague in Bremen, describing a rural adaptation of ice preservation employing peat layers analogous to certain Bavarian estate cellars. Cost analysis further strengthened the case. Construction materials were sourced locally. Total expense, including hired labor for ice cutting, was approximately $63. A comparable masonry ice house in Denver, built with brick and mortar, had cost over $400. Elspeth's fuel savings were indirect but measurable. By reducing reliance on heavy salting, she preserved meat weight and avoided purchasing additional salt transported at high cost from Eastern suppliers. There was no celebration, there was arithmetic. In October 1866, Herr Weiss visited formally. "I had presumed," he said, examining the drained floor and intact peat layers, "that agricultural fibers would retain moisture and accelerate loss. Your drainage has prevented that condition." Dr. Farnsworth conceded with professional restraint. "The principle is sound. I misjudged the cumulative resistance provided by the layered insulation." Elspeth listened, returned to stacking firewood. By winter 1867, 3 additional ranches within 15 miles constructed similar ice houses. One modified the design to include a double-door entry to reduce warm air infiltration. By 1870, county agricultural records noted at least 14 ice storage structures in Larimer County employing peat or straw insulation. Estimated average construction cost, $70 to $90. Average ice retention into August, 45 to 60% of initial mass. In 1872, the Colorado Agricultural Society published a brief notice recommending subterranean ice vaults of composite fiber insulation for small ranch operations. Meat spoilage rates during summer months in participating ranches declined measurably. One ledger comparison from 1873 showed spoilage losses reduced from 30% to under 8% among adopters. The method required labor, but not capital beyond reach. By the 1880s, as rail refrigeration advanced and mechanical ice production emerged in eastern cities, rural ice houses declined in prominence. Yet in parts of Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, peat-and-straw insulated chambers persisted into the early 20th century. A 1911 bulletin from the Colorado Agricultural College referenced early territorial ice vaults as precursors to modern cold storage principles, noting their effective use of insulation and drainage. Several surviving structures, collapsed roofs long replaced, still show layered peat remnants within stone-lined walls. Modern thermal studies confirm that 10 inches of dry fibrous insulation can reduce conductive heat transfer by more than 80% compared to bare masonry. The physics Elspeth relied upon remains unchanged. Heat flows from warm to cold. Air resists that flow. Thickness matters. Elspeth McLeod did not dispute the learned men who questioned her. Their skepticism was rational, grounded in experience and incomplete information. What they overlooked was not a secret, but a detail: the compound effect of thickness, dryness, and earth sheltering. Authority often confuses familiarity with understanding. Yet stone, straw, peat, and soil obey no hierarchy. They respond only to temperature gradients and material properties. In 1866, on a north-facing slope in Colorado, a widow with calloused hands applied those properties with precision. The ice remained.